On the first course customization, our goal is to figure out how to programmatically use the data access layer. As you know, ISP Designer generates for you an N-tier application. Included in that N-tier is a data access layer. The data access layer is actually a very powerful layer that essentially communicates with the database and handles all of the things related to the data to the database. This data access layer is a generic layer that will work regardless of which database product you're using, whether you're using Access, SQL Server, Oracle, or MySQL, and it works regardless of whether you're using the inline or the stored procedure. What it actually does is it essentially insulates you from either product-specific or inline versus stored procedure-specific details. Now, it may in turn call either the inline or the stored procedures, and it may call, in fact it will, call the appropriate stored procedure or appropriate inline code, and it will also make sure that the SQL that gets generated in order to retrieve the records or update the records are product-specific, are database-specific, in order to make sure that we maximize the performance and the feature set that are available in each one of the database products. Just as one example, SQL Server 2000 and 2005 did not have the concept of row number like what Oracle did. So in the case of Oracle, we do use a row number feature, but the SQL generated for 2000 SQL Server does not have that feature, so we have to essentially implement the same functionality in other mechanisms in order to retrieve the right set of records. So with that background, what we want to do here is that, okay, if we want to essentially utilize and implement some customizations, how do we use the data access layer? So some examples here are how to programmatically, how do we retrieve records from the database? How do we do paging? For example, if I have a million or tens of millions of records, how do I make sure that I get only a subset of those records and page through 50 at a time or 100 at a time? Similarly, how do I update the data in the databases? And then, slightly more complex things like, for example, how would I be able to use where clauses, and how can I do ands and ors, and then also utilize the order by. And then finally, how do I want to delete the records? Let's go through and get some basics first. There are two classes that are generated that are very important for each one of your database tables. First and foremost, you have essentially a class that will be called the record class. And there's another class that is called the table class. So when we refer to the record class and we refer to a table class, typically what we refer to are the specific classes that allow you to access data from the database. The purpose of the record class, and the record class will be named based on your table name. So for example, if you've got a customers table in your database, we will generate for you a class called customers record. Similarly, you will have a products record and an employees record and so on if you've got those respective tables in your database. And in addition to that, we will generate a products table, a customers table, a employees table class as well. The record class, the purpose of the record class is it is an object that corresponds to a row of data from the database. So for example, if I have an instance of a customer's record class, then it is as if I have a pointer to the row from the database for that particular customer. So what I will be able to do from the record class is be able to retrieve the specific fields from that, and we'll talk about that in a minute. The table class, and we use the table class in a generic way. If you have a view or if you set up a custom query or a query in ISP Designer, the suffix that is used for this class changes from table to a view or a query. But for the purpose of this discussion, I'll refer to all of those classes as a table class. And the table class, the best way to think about them is think about them as a schema class, a class that essentially represents the information that you might find in a schema. Like, for example, you can find out what columns are or what fields are part of this particular table, as well as, for example, what is the data type for a particular column and so on. The table class also supports methods or functions to retrieve, save, and delete records. And some of those are also available at the record class, and we'll talk about the difference between the two here. So those are the two fundamental classes that we are going to use on an ongoing basis. One key point to differentiate here is that the record class and the table class, do not confuse them with what we refer to sometimes as record control class or a table control class. Just by the mere use of the word control, when we refer to record control, it is a user interface control. It refers to a row that is displayed on a web page. Or in the case of a table control, it is the table control panel that is displayed on the page. So we will refer to things as record class and table class when we refer to the data access. We will refer to things as record control class or table control class when we refer to them when they are controls, user interface controls on a web page. So hopefully with that background, let's proceed on to what exactly can you do with the record class. A record class, if you have an instance of that record class, let's say in a variable called employee record or EMP rec, you could refer to all of the fields from that particular row in the table. So you could say employee record dot first name or hire date or last name or whatever other fields that you might have. Similarly, if you have a instance for an order record, you would refer to it as order record dot order amount dot quantity and so on. Secondly, these fields, as I mentioned to you before, are strongly typed. So in every field that you have corresponds to the specific data type in VB.NET or in C# that you would expect based on the data type of your database. So essentially, if you've got an nvarchar field in SQL Server as an example, it is a text field with a defined width. It will correspond to a string data type in VB.NET or C#. Similarly, if you've got a date time field or a date field in SQL Server, we will create essentially a higher date field whose data type will be date and currency and numeric and so on and so forth. So the object that you get is strongly typed. This is unlike, for example, the data table that you get returned when you use standard ODBC or ADO.NET, which is not a strongly typed. It's just nothing but an array of arrays, effectively. And then you have to manage the conversion between strings and so on and so forth. In this particular case, it's a strongly typed object that you have. The common methods that you have available in the record class are things like save, delete, and so on. What the save method does is, of course, as you can imagine, saves the new data and allows you to update the data in the database in here. And you can call that directly. So you could say emprec employee record dot save as an example after you have updated that record, and the updated record will be saved. Of course, it will be only saved when you commit the transaction, and we'll talk about that in a minute over here. You can, of course, delete that record. You can retrieve the ID. The ID is returned as a key-value pair, and this is especially useful if you have composite keys. Generally, if you just have the customer ID field as an example, you could refer to that and get that value directly. But sometimes you have composite fields. How do you pass the ID of a record if you have, let's say, a composite field, a set of 3 fields that make up the primary key of that record? Well, you can by using the getID function, and it automatically creates a key value XML structure in order for you to handle that. Then there are 2 other important functions to keep in mind. One of them is format, the other is called parse. Basically, the reverse of each other. They do the opposite things of each other. The format function, its job is to take the native data type, let's say date time, for example, and then convert it into a string based on the internationalization that is currently in effect. So if you are in the United States And if you have a date field, the format function will return for you a US formatted date, month, day, year separated by slashes as an example. But if you are in UK, you may get, date hyphen month hyphen year as an example, or if you're in Australia, whatever the Australian format is, you would get that. So the format function is a very, very useful function because not only does it do the conversion from the string to the from the native data type to string for display purposes, but it takes into account all of the internationalization rules that are currently in effect for that conversion. And then parse does the opposite of that. So format is used when you are displaying data, and parse is used when you are retrieving the data. And the job of parse is to essentially take the string value that the user entered and then convert it back into the native value here. So again, it strips off the the dashes and the slashes or the currency symbols like dollar or percentage symbol and things of that nature. So these are all very useful functions that are available on the record class that you can take advantage of whenever you are doing any kind of displaying data or retrieving data. Next thing is the table class, and we'll start going through examples here in a minute. The table class, primary job of the table class is to essentially give you access to the schema, but also to be able to query the database. So you could essentially call, for example, like the getRecord function or the getRecords function if you want to get multiple records. You can call the deleteRecord and the deleteRecord functions and so on. So think of this as when you say customer table dot get records, it's as if saying select star from customers, and then all you have to do now is specify the where and the order by. So in effect, when you say customers table dot get records, the first part of your SQL, select star from customers, is written effectively for you, and you only need to specify the second part of that, which is the where clause and the order by, as parameter to the get records. And then you also have something like get count, which is equivalent to select count star, and get columns. Get columns simply gives you the schema that is available for you over there. Okay, so why use record or table classes? I think we covered most of these things. Records are returned as objects. They're not an array of arrays, basically. They are not an array of fields. Each field has its own native type. One of the most important things that getRecords does and handles underneath the hood effectively is it supports paging. As I mentioned to you, the concept of row number did not exist in the earlier versions of SQL Server, so you did not have the ability to say select, you could only do select top 10, for example, but you could not say the select from the 50th through the 60th record, for example, in SQL Server. So how did you do that? Well, the way that the getRecords function gives you an ability to support paging without you having to worry about what SQL gets generated for that particular purpose for the different database types, whether it be Access, MySQL, SQL Server, or Oracle. Another important feature of getRecords and the whole area how this works is the ability to expand the foreign keys that you have available, especially in queries. On the query step of the panel wizard, you may specify, for example, you may say shipper equal Federal Express as an example. Well, if you wanted to say that, rather than saying shipper ID equal 37, because you may be using a development database where the shipper ID for Federal Express corresponds to 37 versus the shipper ID in the production database for Federal Express may be 97 as an example. Well, how do you ensure that you can develop an application where it will work both in your development environment as well as in your production environment? Well, some people prefer to use a string value for that, essentially the expanded value. Well, getRecords supports that so that you could effectively say shipper ID equals Federal Express and let IronSpeed Designer figure out that, okay, this is equal to 37 or 94 or whatever the case might be, and do the right thing, if you will. Finally, it allows you to do, of course, order by, as you could imagine, and then more importantly, not just by ID number. So not just, when you are retrieving, for example, you're showing a filter value in a drop-down list for, let's say, country or shipper as an example. Well, you want to show the drop-down in alphabetical order, not ID order. Federal Express may be 37 and UPS might be number 1 as an ID, but then you want to show Federal Express alphabetically comes before UPS, in which case you want to show that higher. So the order by also not only supports it by ID, but also by the display foreign key as. Some other logistical details that are automatically handled for you. Don't have to worry about an open and close connection. Don't have to worry about caching of data. Don't have to worry about inline SQL or stored procedure, and you don't need to know SQL at all when you try to use that. So just as a way of a quick example, and then what we'll do is we'll switch over to a sample application and then try to do some code customizations there. So as an example, if you have something like a select star from customers where country equal to USA, order by ascending, state ascending, and return 10 records from page 17 as an example. And then you want, normally if you were to do that, you would get an array of arrays. But if you were to do this here, you would use customers table.getRecords. You would specify a where string, which is, as you can see, it's specified as country equal to USA. And you can specify an order by clause, as you can see over here. And then you would give it a page number. Page numbers, remember, are zero-based, so that's why when you want page 17, you are going to refer to it as page 16 here. And then you want to return 10 records. So those are the kind of the 4 parameters, if you will, for get records that you're going to get back. And of course, you're going to get back customers' record. Always need to start and end a transaction. This is called a transaction boundary. And then there is an exception to that, that if you are using the existing button handlers, for example, that we generate for you, like a save button click, then we automatically create a transaction boundary for you. But if you are using your own buttons as an example, you will have to do a start and an end transaction. And then you can do any number of gets, deletes, and saves. They'll all be committed when you call the commit method. And of course, commit is only required if you're saving and updating. And it's always a great idea to handle exceptions because, the database may not be connected, maybe have gone offline, whatever the case might be. You want to be able to handle that properly here. So at this point in time, I'm going to switch over to IronSpeed Designer. And what I'm going to do here, I created a sample applications with our favorite Northwind or Southwind database. Here is my products show table that we're looking at. What I want to do is I'm going to insert a button on the button bar over here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to write some code in order to flip the discontinued flag back and forth here based on the selected records as an example. So what I'm going to do is, and we'll do this one step at a time. So we'll switch over to design mode. We'll go to the panel buttons area over here, scroll all the way to the right. I have got the reset button here. And I'm going to right mouse click over here, and I'm going to insert a new cell or a new column to the right of this thing. So if you can see here, a right mouse click brought up the right click menu, insert column right. And we have now a simple right a cell over here. And what I'm going to do is click on the other toolbox panels, and I've got a themed button here that I'm going to drag and drop. Now, from a look and feel perspective, this will not look right, but that's not the purpose of this webinar over here. I'm going to go ahead and rename this thing. I'm going to call it, flip flag. Flip the discontinued flag, basically. So just a funky name here. And what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to go ahead and click the build button over here so that it generates. Actually, what I need to do is I need to bind that. So I'm going to double click that. I'm going to change the flip discontinued I can put a tooltip if I so choose. I'm going to go to the binding, and I select custom over here for that after specifying this. And I'm just going to go ahead and press OK. And now I'll go ahead and build. And what this will do is it will have created just a click handler for me. Now, since I have specified just a very a custom flag, it's going to be an empty click handler. So when I right mouse click and go to the code section, I have the ability to override the click handler for flip flag here. That's the name of my button. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. And what it's going to do is it's going to insert for me an empty method over here in my controls file at the right place, and it leaves me basically in this particular code file, controls.vb file. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this one, and I'm going to open up this file in Visual Studio. You know, as I've mentioned to many of you before who have attended the webinars before, what IronSpeed is great for is for application generation and code generation. We give you an editor, but that's not what our core competency is. We would rather spend our energy on giving you better templates, better pages, better code generation, rather than on duplicating the functionality that's already available in Visual Studio. So yes, you have a little bit of a simple editor, but if you want to do anything more complex, we recommend you use Visual Studio. You know, we're not going to implement a debugger in IronSpeed Designer. We're not going to implement the fanciest IntelliSense in IronSpeed Designer, because that's not what our core competency is, and we are not going to spend time in duplicating functionality in those areas and compete with Microsoft. They have many more resources than we do, so we'd rather focus on what we are good at, which is generation, rather than on duplicating the Visual Studio functionality. So I've got this simple function over here. I'm going to just go ahead and just make some space for myself over here. I don't need the my base because I'm not doing anything for calling the base here. Let's do something very simple. First of all, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to write the data access code effectively, and then I'm going to write effectively the code in order to what I'm going to do is I'm going to write the code that retrieves the selected records. And then what I'm going to do is effectively write the database access layer code. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually on the user interface side. So first of all, I'm going to say I am going to define record controls. The record controls, remember, are user interface controls. And in this particular case, I want to essentially get products table control row. The table control rows correspond to the specific rows that are displayed on my user interface. So I'm just simply defining a variable over here. Now I'm going to say rec controls equal to me.getSelected record controls. So what I want to do basically is retrieve all of the selected record controls. So if you were looking at this page here, you would effectively see anything that I checked here in the checkbox is considered a selected record control. So if I selected 3 of them, that would be the 3 that will be those are the 3 record controls that I have retrieved from there. So at this point in time, what I'm going to do is now what I would like to do is go through each one of these record controls. So I'm going to define another variable, rec control, as products table control row. And then as you can imagine, I'm going to say for each rec control in rec controls, I'm going to do something. What do I want to do first and foremost basically over here? Before I do that, let me actually put a try catch around here, so that just in case if there is an error, then we will have that here. So I'm going to move this content here. So I have all of that available here. So now I have gotten all of these controls. Now what I want to do is for each one of these controls, what I want to do is simply get the ID of that control so that I can use that ID to read the record from the database. Because right now I only have what is available to me from the user interface. I need to be able to read the data from the database and update that flag. So that's the reason why I'm going to go around this code here and add more code above and below this area. So obviously, I now need to go to the database side and start doing things. Well, what do I need to do first of all before I go to the database side? I need to, of course, start a transaction. So how can I do that? Well, we have essentially collapsed and created some utility functions for you so that we automatically give you the ability to start a transaction in a very easy way. All you need to do is call dbutils.startTransaction, and you would, of course, need to essentially, at the end of this thing, call dbutils.commitTransaction. And then what you would need to do is, if there is an exception, you would need to do a rollback transaction, and then you would implement a finally and use a dbutils.end transaction. So in effect, let's go through what each one of this stuff does. This basically starts a transaction, as you can imagine. This ends the transaction. You want to put it in the finally area of the try-catch block over here because you want to end the transaction regardless of whether there was an exception or not. In the case of an exception, you want to roll back. So if there are multiple saves, for example, you want to roll back half of those saves that were made but not committed effectively. And then, so what will happen is, let's say if there was an exception someplace in this for each loop, you will skip the commit transaction, go straight to the exception, and you would roll back. So let's go back over here. So now I've set up the infrastructure basically over here. By the way, all of these are in the slides, and you will have access to these slides right after you will get an email with the link for downloading this. So now what I'll do is, at this point in time, I need to be able to retrieve the ID and retrieve that record, basically. So how do I do that? Well, if I say rec control and type dot and say get, then I have a variety of functions that are available to me from here. One of them essentially is the get record function, effectively, which is going to return back the record that is available to me. But that record at that particular point in time is not a writable record. It may be an incomplete record. It's simply only a record that is in memory that is over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to do, I can also do something different over here. I could do a get record effectively, but I could also retrieve the user interface control over here by essentially getting like the product name as an example. Now in this particular case, I have not displayed the product ID, so that's why I need to do a get record effectively. So now, there you go, except I need to save this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to define it as a rec as products record. Now as we talked about, products record is the data access layer class that corresponds to a row in my database. So now I say rec equal to this thing. And as a safety mechanism, I'm going to say if not is nothing rec, then I want to do some work over here. What do I need to do here? Now, first and foremost, the important thing to remember is that this record that I retrieved was just in-memory record. It's not a record that I can update. So I need to essentially get an updatable record effectively from here. So how do I do that? So let's define another updatable rec as products record. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say updatable rec equal to products table dot get record, and I'm going to call get record because I'm trying to read the data from the database. And let's look at what are the different options that I have available. I have available a where string. I can specify where string and an order by clause. Third, I can pass ID as a string and define whether pass a mutable, which essentially determines whether I want an updatable record or not. This is the one that I'm interested in. And then there's a fourth option, which is also essentially a key value pair instead of ID as a string, basically. So in this particular case, since there is it's not a composite key, I could use either number 3 or number 4 over here. But if I would had a composite key, I would have to use number 4 signature here, which is a name value pair. It's a key value pair effectively that is there. So for the purpose of this example, we know number 4 will always work, whether it is a single key or a composite key basically over here. So we'll use number 4 over here. So how do I get the ID? Well, I have the record that I read earlier, so I could do record. And then as I mentioned to you, we have a function called getID, which returns the key value pair that is available to me. So I'm just going to use the getID function. And because I want a mutable record, mutable means a changeable record that I can update, I'm going to go ahead and call pass true over here. And so that's what essentially retrieves from me a record for that particular for that particular product. And again, if not is nothing updateable record, then do something. What do I want to do over here? I want to do updateable record dot discontinued flag. Sorry about that. I'm going to do a discontinued flag equal to not of updateable rec dot discontinued. So this is essentially flips my discontinued flag bit, and then I'm going to say updateable rec dot save, and that will allow me to save that record. So in effect, what I've done is I've retrieved the selected record controls. I have then gone through each one of the selected record controls. They could be 1, they could be 0, they could be whatever. I need to be, and of course the for each loop would not go through if they are only 0, if you will. And then I have the ability, I'm going to go through, retrieve the record from that row, from the user interface row, get its ID, then essentially go ahead and retrieve an updatable record from the database. The reason why we need to get an updatable record is the following. Keep in mind that I may be only displaying 3 fields on the user interface, in which case when you call the get record from the record control, it'll only have partial information on it, because I may have 100 fields in the database, but I'm displaying only 3 fields. So in order to essentially make sure that I have all of the data for that record, I need to retrieve the record, a fresh record from the database, which is contains all of the data. I modify whatever I need to modify and then save that data basically. That's the reason why I need to get an updatable record effectively. Okay, that's all there is to it basically. I can go ahead and save that, and I can switch over to IronSpeed Designer and run it. But before I do that, I want to do one final thing over here. Obviously, after I've changed this thing, I want to be able to refresh the data on my web page. So to do that, what I will do is me.dataChange. I can simply set the data change flag to true. And what this does is that in the pre-render method, we check the data change flag, and we automatically reload the data and display the new data. So this simply make sure that my data is going to be refreshed on the page once I have done this particular step. So I'm going to go ahead and save, and if everything goes right, I'm going to go ahead and I can simply switch over to design mode and live preview, and it'll compile it for me, and it'll display the flip discontinued flag. And hopefully, let's say for example, I take let's say Chef Anton, and it is set to yes, and if I go ahead and flip, hopefully it'll switch to no, as you can see. So now all of these are no, so I can go ahead and select all of these no's and flip discontinued, and they will all flip to yes as an example. And of course, if I have a yes and a no, like in the last 2 rows, and I flip that, hopefully they will become a no and a yes over here. So that's what a simple example of what you can accomplish with the data access layer here. I'll take some questions over here.